neurodivergent people.
There we go.
Excellent. Okay, excuse the technical difficulties, everybody. We will get started. Just one moment. Okay. So, welcome to this afternoon's webinar. Can everybody hear? Could you just let us know in the chat or by raising your hand or giving a reaction if you can hear us clearly? Thank you. Okay. Thank you for attending today. This is our webinar, Words Matter, on inclusive language and strengths-based language around neurodiversity. We are so happy to be here with you, and there will be some time at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end to share your thoughts on this presentation, ask questions, and use it to the best of your advantage. So without further ado, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Tríona. I am one of the leaders of the Jedi Task Force at Nanjing International School in China. I'm a neurodivergent person presenting with ADHD and autism. And probably due to my ADHD, I have 2 half masters in neurodiversity and inclusion, running out of executive function in the middle of both. So whilst I have a lot of knowledge, I do not have the piece of paper just yet. But throughout my teaching and advocacy work, I am an anti-ableist advocate. I am a cognitive linguist, and I also like to embroider. Moving on.
Hi, my name is Amina Harrison-Fletcher. I'm an international educator, multilingual specialist. I speak 3 languages. I'm also neurodivergence and social model advocate. I'm a MEL specialist, or ELL, or EAL, there are a variety of names for now, a neurodivergent person, and a new parent. I do also have a master's degree that is not that relevant to education.
Fantastic. And so we're coming here today from an educator's perspective. We work in an inclusive learning community. That has been our mission since 2013. And so really what we are interested in is how our mission to be inclusive, especially in our language around neurodiversity and neurodivergence, can be applied to other contexts. What are similar challenges that we are facing, and how, as a community, we can all move forwards together in using respectful and the most up-to-date or best practice language around neurodiversity. So we would like to begin by asking you in the chat to share how you are arriving today. How are you feeling? What thoughts and emotions do you have around this topic at this point in time? And anything else that you would like to share. So we're going to ask you to do a waterfall. So wait until 1 minute has passed, and then we'll ask everybody to share all together. So let's do that in the chat now. Okay. Amina, would you like to get the waterfall going? You can post now. How are you arriving today? Fantastic. Tired but hopeful. Excellent. Okay, so without further ado, neuroinclusive language, best practices. What do we know and how do we know it? And answering some of those excellent questions that you were helpful enough to share in the registration form. So, we shall begin from our context, talking about international schools, inclusive language, and how we navigate working across many different cultural contexts and social contexts around neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So on the screen, you can see the wheel of safety and belonging. And this was created by the magnificent Dr. Emily Meadows. And you can see that it includes many different dimensions of identity, from disability to mental health to neurodiversity, and then ranging across accent, religion, skin color, race, etc., etc. What we're really interested in today is this intersection between disability, mental health, and neurodiversity. So thinking about the mental model and the tendency to jumble all of these categories together when in fact we believe it's far more helpful to consider them individually and then consider the intersectional overlap. And you will notice that closest to the center, where individuals encounter privilege, safety, and belonging, we have individuals who have no disability, no mental health needs, or present as the neurotypical neurotype. And as we move outwards towards less safety or discrimination, we have multiple and significant disabilities, multiple and or significant mental health needs, and multiple and or significantly neurodivergent presentations in the world. So what we're interested in today is how can we use language mindfully in order to help all of us who encounter ourselves at the outer realm of this wheel of safety and belonging, and to create safe and inclusive spaces, moving everybody towards the center. So with that said, Amina will speak to the medical model and how this has historically been a stopgap for discussing neurodiversity and neurodivergence.
So when we're talking about historical perspective and a medical model, we talk about a person being the fault of everything and neurodivergence as a disability in a broader sense and inability to do things. So we were looking at using the language and thinking about possible accommodations, the disadvantages. We are talking about special educational needs and the diagnostic pathways to prove that we are as well, as usually has been said, disabled, so we cannot do something. So neurodivergent differences were not accounted; they were enforced as through the diagnostic pathways. And under the medical model, we are forced to talk about our shortcomings. We are forced to blame our impairments for our inability to do something and for our need to support. So this is the very important things, and it's a barrier. We become the center of it, and as a neurodivergent people, and we create barriers around us instead of creating pathways for us.
Awesome. The barriers also are seen as a result of personal flaws rather than those that are created by society and by systems, and most of all, by the language that we use when we are thinking about neurodiversity and neurodivergence. It's important to realize that the social model only came into being in the 1970s when Judy Singer conceived of the term as a way of describing neurodiversity as a naturally occurring variance within all species. And in fact, this heightened sensitivity does present across species. So it's not limited to human beings. But the ways in which we have come to speak about it and deal with these differences tends to be trying to force individuals to fit into the neurotypical model, which has become commonplace, especially across education systems that were designed in the 18th and 19th centuries. Our concern at the moment is moving towards a more inclusive social model of understanding neurodiversity as variance, as including neurotypical learners as a neurotype, and in moving all learners towards the center through creating spaces for belonging through our intentional use of language. And so it brings us to the dreaded D, one that I personally find offensive when I think about neurodiversity and neurodivergent. As a late diagnosed neurodivergent woman and mother of two neurodivergent children, to encounter the word disorder attached to so many neurodivergencies is something that I struggle with regularly because it's framing it from the get-go as a disadvantage, a disorder, and something that is ultimately the responsibility of the individual who is suffering from said disorder. And so when Amina and I started thinking about it, we started to think about disorder, diagnoses, suffering from, all of this subtle use of language that frames it in such a negative way. And how might we design with intentionality for language to reflect, yes, of course, there are challenges when it comes to neurodivergent learners operating within systems designed for neurotypical children, but how can we celebrate strengths also? And how can we approach areas for growth? Amina, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I would like to add to that that if we're using words like diagnosis or disability constantly, we are forced to talk about what we're bad at and where are we ineffective, or we cannot do something without shining the light on what we can do. And talking about, yes, as you mentioned, talking about our strengths, talking about what we need. When it comes to social model, we acknowledge our condition and neurodivergence, and we can seek medical advice, but it's not a necessity.
Absolutely. And so we have struggled, well, not struggled. We've struggled forcefully in a beneficial way to remove the D community when we are thinking about people or ADHD learners, sort of with great intentionality, removing that D from the get-go in our common parlance. And whilst we recognize that disability is not a dirty word, and it is a very real experience, especially those who suffer. See, we all make mistakes, especially those of us who experience invisible disabilities. But the D for disorder and the D for diagnoses are something that we need to bring intentionality to. And we'll be doing that shortly when we think about how might we audit and address our own language. So we're reaching a moment to pause and reflect here. This comes from the magnificent website Unlearning Ableism. And here are some examples of everyday microaggressions that we hear and, as you just heard, that we use regularly. And I think it's really important that we address that we're all learners in this field, that we in a field that changes so quickly, where today something is acceptable and tomorrow it has been challenged and we are asked to use a new, more respectful term. How might we, with intentionality, look at our own language? Which of these microaggressions do we use, and which ones can we shine a spotlight on and begin to think about? How might we use different terminology? So we're going to pause here for 2 minutes, and we're going to ask you to reflect on what surprises you about these examples and what's missing. What's something that in your experience is also used as a common microaggression? And how might we change our usage here? I'll put a 2-minute timer. We'll meet back at 05. Okay. So I think because of time differences, we don't have as many participants. We had thought to open this up to the floor and break off into breakout rooms. Amina, do you have any comments or anything that you would like to point out in terms of what's surprising about these microaggressions? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I
No
mute
worries.
myself. So I wouldn't say surprising, and some of them are because I haven't seen them or heard them for some time. But I also would say that even in our very inclusive community as NIS, as an international school, where we are actively trying to stop ableist language. There's still people, and I cannot say that I haven't done that myself, focusing on only limitations. Absolutely, I do that sometimes, and I catch myself and I stop myself. And it's something that we are, as educators and just people who work with neurodivergent people or ourselves neurodivergent, have to reflect on and think about it all the time. It's a active work. It's not something that comes to you unconsciously. It's a conscious, active thought process.
And I think that's so valuable because that modeling of catching yourself and really modeling in real time I can't believe I said that. What I meant was like I'm always picking up from my kids in class, crazy. Oh my God, that's crazy. And then I will catch it and I will reframe it. Oh, that was an ableist microaggression. What I meant to say was that's so wild or that's so interesting. But I think
But
just
even
showing
like
them
negative,
how to do that without shame.
yeah, but even like a negative self-talk out loud, sometimes you have to catch yourself on that and talk about, like, remodel it or reframe what you had to say. So instead of, oh, I'm so stupid, something that a lot of children do and a lot of adults do, or using words that they shouldn't be using about their cognitive abilities. They have, like, they should reframe it, because the negative talk doesn't help themselves, but also models it to other people. And it is a microaggression, as a personal aggression, a microaggression to themselves, but also sharing with the world, which is not great.
Isn't that just so showing and so telling that that internalized ableist dialogue becomes the self-talk? So if anybody needs any encouragement to use affirmative language, it is that we are actually shaping the self-talk and the self-perception of our beautiful mini humans and people around us. And every time that we challenge or every time that we try to do better with language, then we create that space for positive self-growth. And that has got to be something worth striving for. So these are just some examples, and the more you investigate and the more you are aware of your own context, the more you will become aware of how and when we are using language that can be dismissive or can be infantilizing or can be just ableist. And then we come to thinking about how we might actively interrupt that process. So I'm going to show you a very brief checklist and go-to guide that can help us when we are thinking about either self-talk and microaggressions that we might commit, or when we hear people using them and how we might gently call them in using the speak up technique or gentle questioning rather than alienating language, and ask them to really think about the impact of their language. Because many times with microaggressions, it's not the intent. We often hear, but I didn't mean it like that. And how do we turn those moments powerful sharing that we can use to help everybody grow together and use more
I
inclusive
I
language?
have
So
also
while we're
put
waiting for that to open, Amina, what do you think is the most important thing people need to know in terms
so
of
I
moving from the shame spiral of I said the wrong thing, or I didn't know, or I didn't mean it like that, into a more progressive or beneficial
don't blame
use
yourself
of inclusive
at
language?
all times. Just correct yourself when
Hold
you
on.
can.
It looks
Um,
like something went wrong. We're trying to get you
I
back
have
into the
shared the
meeting.
link in the chat. So if people would like to look at the document themselves, that would be very useful. Uh, I can also talk about what it says. So words have the, I'll just read it through aloud. So words have the power to separate and to include. Same applies to the words that are used when talking about neurocognitive differences such as autism spectrum, ADHD, and dyslexia, and more. There are so many more. And we know there's a dyspraxia, dyscalculia, a variety of cognitive differences, the processing speed, uh, and even from the MML perspective, a language perspective, language abilities, because yes, it might not be a neurodivergence
Oh, okay.
as such for the moment, but it's also um, it it can be also something that has a effect on learning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Well, can you hear me? Well, let's hope that somebody can hear something. What we are looking at here is, it is glitching. Do you want to
Awfully.
leave and try come back? I will go through this document. It's from, it's the
Yeah.
Neuroinclusive Language Guide from squarespace.com. And as you can see on the left-hand side, it gives a list of potentially ableist terms or discourse, which they helpfully allow us to understand maybe patronizing or deficit-based. And on the right-hand side, they offer a list of better alternatives that are both supportive and strengths-based. So something that we always need to be aware of in this field is that language shifts radically and very quickly. When we started working maybe 4 years ago with this, one of the texts that we were recommended was called Blind Spots. And it's a seminal text, and I encourage you to read it if you have not. But since then, we've become aware that the term blind spot is a microaggression. And so I think it's important always that we have humility when we are working in this field or advocating across all of our different fields, that we are aware that we may not always be up to date with the best practice. And again, continue to model that humility when we are called in. Um, and that's the way that we can move forwards together, because people do tend to get defensive when their well-intentioned use of language is called out. I've often heard people say things like, well, that's the way that it was referred to when I did my training or when I learned about it. But it's important to remember that this is a very dynamic field. And so something that you learned or we learned 5 years ago may well be out of date now. For example, as Amina and I were discussing earlier, the term special needs is within our context no longer considered to be a respectful use of language. We're not talking about unicorns or orcs, and instead we describe specific needs or adjustments or learning needs. But as you pointed out, Amina, it is still used broadly in other contexts. And so being aware of that again is showing that cultural humility and not alienating people, because we need to move forwards with intentionality together. Oh, the air conditioning just turned off. I
Yes,
feel
it
so
did.
great.
Uh, I
Ah,
wanted to add to that special educational needs, and in some countries, or specifically in the UK, and we're going to be talking about UK a little bit later. SEND, so special educational needs and disability, very much alienates people, and a small group or um, taking child out on a regular basis from the classroom. If the child is neurodivergent, usually, unfortunately, yes, alienates them, damages their sense of self, and uh, does not allow them to socialize. So it creates more barriers to their learning instead of creating actually an environment where they can thrive.
and where all learners can thrive. If we think about universal design for learning, then an accommodation that will help a neurodivergent child will inevitably help other children also. So it's bringing that broad spectrum intentionality to what we do as educators. And we have been really enjoying your questions and your suggested topics for conversation that you submitted in the forum. And so, why does it matter in terms of what you are asking us is what we would like to address now. So, if you have any further doubts or questions, we will give you our emails at the end of this session. For now, we will just cover these topics that you have so kindly asked to address. And again, can we please just reiterate that we do not work across all fields. We are education-specific experts and not even the experts in every part of that field. And so we can just tell you what works for us and what we have tried and hope that it will help to generate conversation in your respective areas. And so, Amina, from all of our questions, which one would you like to kick off with?
We can talk about how to self-advocate and
Okay.
how to ask for that. And unfortunately, as an educator, we should start from the very early age. I know that in many countries, including the UK, diagnosis, if needed, doesn't happen till not grade 3, year 3. However, a lot of children who end up being neurodivergent and being diagnosed neurodivergent do not know how to self-advocate for themselves beforehand. And so when we look at ourselves, we need to talk about not necessarily knowing who are you in this spectrum of neurodivergency or neurotypical person. You just we need to teach them how to ask for what they need. And that's where universal design comes in place, because this is where we can share the ideas that kids' voice and choice. This is where voice and choice is very much important, because yes, some children will need noise cancelling headphones, and they need to know how to say that, oh, it's too loud for me. And some children will need speech to text, because it's easier for them to plan through writing, through talking. And some children will need a hockey stool or just a different seating arrangement.
If you would like, how does that link to the question that we had about EHCPs and how to address those from a strengths-based approach?
Oh, yeah. So EHCPs in an international place called either IEPs or ILPs. So it's a learning support plan. It's done by our learning support. So we do have a learning support department and strategies class, which is, I find, absolutely fantastic. We do share the strengths and challenges. So and have goals for children, but a lot of those goals are looked at as a progress, not a final step, not achieving something and making sure that, this child can solve 20 math problems in 40 minutes or can write an essay without mistakes. It's about process and how they work through it, how they plan it, how are they accountable to themselves and to other people for their work, without putting pressure of accomplishing something, I don't know, grand. I would put it this way.
So it's about growth rather than
yes, it's always always about growth. Yes. So we've talked about responsible accommodation in the workplace. You know a little bit more about it than I do.
Challenges over neurotypical learners. So if our systems are designed for the 80%, And if our neurodivergent learners experience significant barriers, then this narrative of ADHD being a superpower is dismissive of the real barriers, the very real barriers that this disability presents, and can also deny learners access. And again, we're thinking about learners, but if you apply this across workplace contexts where reasonable accommodations should be in an inclusive workplace, they should be offered or negotiated, or in any other context, such as we've had questions from the NHS and from other magnificent sounding institutions. Um, then how might we apply those same principles in creating inclusive spaces, in creating a dialogue whereby which power is acknowledging these very real barriers and creating systems of access for all learners or all workers or all people who are working and participating in this space. So in this way, ADHD is my superpower, and everybody's a little bit autistic are something that we can come at from an inclusive language perspective by addressing them by that calling in way. Other questions that we're looking at. How do we get the global majority to move from the concept of normal and not normal? There's an easy one. Amina, what do you think about that?
Well, it's only self-advocating and sharing your experiences. There's no other way. Unfortunately, we're not institutions that bring all of those legislations and narrative, a bigger narrative in. But again, looking at our little community here, more we talk about our neurodivergencies, more we talk about our challenges, but also our strengths, our abilities, our talents. We allow children around us to see and change their mindset and change their narrative in their head. And so more they know about themselves, a year 6 student or grade 5 student or grade 11 student or even a EY student, 5-6-year-olds, if they hear those things more often, they will be able to change. It takes time, unfortunately. I would like to be that person who comes to, I don't know, a government and be like, you know what, we are neurodivergent, let's just change everything that you do here. But it doesn't happen to different other subjects, unfortunately. So what do you think?
I agree. I think the work is slow. Like we spoke about earlier, the metaphor of the bamboo is very present in this question. A bamboo can grow for 3 years, putting down roots below the soil before it sprouts into a tiny little sprout and begins to grow above the soil. So really laying that groundwork is so important. Having those conversations, I always say that it's moving people heart by heart, one person by one person. And if I think about our context, Amina, at the moment we're creating this beautiful poster. We've done so for the last 4 years as part of the Neurodiversity Celebration Week, but really leading as faculty and staff members in sharing, I suppose, our identities and challenging the stigma around neurodivergence, because we have so many members of our fabulous teaching community who are open and proud and mentoring others about neurodivergence. And simply the fact of having your face on the screen once a year allows for those conversations to happen and people to ask questions like, oh, I always thought that people with ADHD couldn't A, B, C, and D, and we can tell them our experience and dispel some of those myths and stereotypes. And it's also really helpful to have a community for us. Wouldn't you agree, Amina? Like we lean on each other share
Absolutely.
our challenges and our strengths in a way that I think is so supportive and doesn't happen in many other places.
Yes, I do also understand the possible stigma
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to, or not even a stigma, just a possible tiredness of trying to explain to people what and who you are in many ways, especially when people are dismissive uh,
Mm-hmm.
of your challenges, but also your strengths. However, I do understand that unfortunately now the only choice we have is really just uh, share our knowledge like
Mm-hmm.
this with students, with other people. It's a personal example. I had a conversation with a person who thinks that they might be autistic, and through sharing my experiences, that person thought that, oh, that would be nice to actually look into it a little bit more. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it's an interesting thing about having those conversations, because if you don't think that you're neurodivergent, you're not neurodivergent most of the time. But if you have a question about it, you probably are. So if you
Yeah, I
question
mean,
yourself,
takes
you
all
start to
types,
think that
right?
yes.
Takes all
Um,
types. Takes all. We all come at it in a different way. I always say if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person.
yes.
Um,
In,
yeah.
not in the sense that you're not neurodivergent if you'd like don't ask yourself, but also in this day and age, just
Mm-hmm.
questioning yourself is something that brings you that lovely joy of thinking you might be or might be not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do like to go to the bust the myth of a normal,
Mm-hmm.
like normality does not exist in any way,
Mm-hmm.
shapes, or form. We're all very different. Tríona and I are vastly different people with vastly different socio-cultural experiences. Most of the people in the place we work at are vastly different,
Mm-hmm.
like dramatically different from each other.
And that isn't, yes, that's true. It's the analogy that's usually used is like it's like a headache, right? Or a
Yeah.
migraine. If you have a migraine once every 5 years, sure, it's annoying and problematic. But if you have a migraine every day, then it becomes a much more significant problem. So I think, like we say, designing UDL will help for all learners with challenges, but at the same time recognizing that neurodivergent people do experience challenges to a much higher extent and much more regularly. And I think in celebrating Neurodiversity Week, we're not looking to exclude anybody because neurodiversity includes all neurotypes. It's in designing for inclusive spaces for everybody, regardless of what labels or what words we use to self-determine who we are or our place in the world. That's what I
Uh,
think.
I wanted to talk
But I also
about.
think that we have about 5 minutes left.
Ooh,
So unfortunately, because of time difference,
Microphone. Microphone.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
here we go.
Somebody today told me the internet is terrible because it's raining. So we will send out the recording of this meeting to everybody. We unfortunately will not have the sufficient number of people nor the time to get into breakout rooms, but we would encourage you to think about workshopping new words for the microaggressions and for or some of the outdated use of language that we have had time to discuss today. We will provide the Padlet link also to this resource, which includes a plethora of different neuroinclusive language guides from different contexts. And we are more than happy to continue this conversation. And I've included also, I mean, this is from a different workshop that I led, but it's sort of best practice information about different neurodivergencies and their presentation. Some resources that you can use, sorry, to start to think about the language that we use for these. And just, I know sometimes Padlets are useless because we never go back to revisit them, but please feel free to delve in and use any of these resources that are relevant or helpful for you.
I would also say, please feel free. I know we didn't answer a lot of questions, but I also know that we possess way more information, and please feel free to reach out if you want to. And we can continue a conversation.
That would be most fabulous. Here you have our email addresses. Again, we'll be sending out the PDF of the slides, so you can connect with us through any of these emails. We'd be more than happy to continue the dialogue with you and address any of your questions or doubts that we didn't have time for today. So,
Thank you.
Wrapping up. Thank you, Amina, for your time and energy and sharing your expertise. We hope that even though it's been quite context specific, that it's been helpful for you. Thank you so much for your time. Happy Neurodiversity Celebration Week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.